I taught high school math and science for years, and I had a quote that I would give to my students. If I said something once, it was eligible to show up on a test. If I said something twice, it was a pretty good bet it might show up on a test. If I said it 3 times or more, then it was a guarantee that you better know this and know it really, really well. Well, there is a phrase that God uses in Genesis chapter 1 quite a few times. In fact, it shows up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times in Genesis 1, and that is, God saw, fill in the blank, and it was good. And I'm going to be using this in several ways. There are 2 directions I want to take this. I'm going to be looking at the God saw part, and then I'm going to look at the good part. But I'm going to start with the God saw part. Very important here to understand. God saw and declared something good. Now, one of the things that, as we'll see later on in the Bible, in a number of places, and I'm going to keep this kind of brief on this part because it shows up so much, but God, in seeing things, it's very, very important to recognize that let me give you an example. The very first name given in the Bible by a human being to God is when Hagar names God, calls him the God who sees. The God, I'm going to put this in big letters, God who sees. In Hebrew, that would be El Roy. As you've seen from our study earlier, El means God, Roy, Rawi, it's kind of hard to say that in English, but the God who sees, or the seeing God. And she gives him that name in Genesis 16:13. Genesis 16:13. Let's go there. Genesis 16:13. Flip over to here. Now the story is this way. Sarah, Abraham's wife, she's Sarai, and he is Abram at the time. Their names get changed later on. Anyway, Sarah is barren. She's got no children. The 2 of them are getting a little bit desperate. They have a child. God's been promising them that there would be a child, and they decide to take it in their own hands. Sarah has as it says in 16:1, she had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And they come up with a solution. Hey, we're going to give Hagar to Abram. He can go in with her, and bada boom, there is a child. Oh, now we've got problems. We now have a rather dysfunctional family because we've got jealousy brewing between Sarah, who has no children, and Hagar, who has a son. And so its tensions get really, really heavy. We have, and pick up in verse 6, Abram says to Sarah, "Behold, your servant is in your power. You do to her as you please." We've got a jealous woman in charge of the life of another woman. Oops. Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. So you've got Hagar running out into the wilderness. In verse 7, the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" And she said, "I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai." And then the angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude." And so, anyway, she goes on, he gives a blessing over this child. It's a strange blessing, but we'll get to that later on. And verse 13 says, she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing." For she said, "Truly I have seen him who looks after me." And therefore the well where she was is called Ber Lahai Roy. We'll shorten that up. The name she gives God is El Roi, the God who sees. This is not a unique thing. It's very important to understand that God is not just aware of our presence and aware of our troubles. He sees them. And the seeing is very, very important in another passage. In Genesis 22, 1 through 19 is really where we are at. We're going to see this is the Abraham and Isaac story. I'm going to pick up at the beginning of that because it's well worth us really exploring where this goes. All right? We've gone from talking about Ishmael, the first son, to the second son, Isaac, who's actually born from Sarah. And after these things, God tested Abraham. It's the beginning of the first verse in chapter 22. Abraham, he said, "Here am I." He said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac." Now, we know good and well, Isaac's not his only son. There's an earlier son from Hagar called Ishmael. This one, Isaac, is a special one. This is the son of the promise. He's different from Ishmael. God has promised to take care of Hagar and Ishmael, and Hagar, in her appreciation, calls him the God who sees. But now the story shifts over to Isaac, the special son. And God tells him, take your son, your only son, your unique son is really what it says, the special one, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. There's a lot of power in this story. There are pictures drawn where Abraham is taking a baby up on a mountain, but that's really not accurate at all, because in verse 6, Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and Isaac is carrying the wood up to the mountaintop. Well, this is obviously not a baby, it's not a toddler, this is a full-grown man. We're talking at least 15, probably 20 years old at this point. He is a man. He is capable of carrying enough wood to offer himself as a burnt sacrifice up onto the top of the mountain. This is not a baby. It says a lot about Isaac and his trust as well. Probably more about Isaac's faith in God than even Abraham. Anyway, we go a little farther into the story, and then Isaac says to his father Abraham, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold, we have fire and wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham said something very, very peculiar here. Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." This is verse 8. This is Genesis 22:8. I want you to be very careful in understanding one here. The word that God uses, God will provide. And the word here for provide, amazingly enough, is the same word for see in Hebrew. He will provide for himself a lamb. The word see can also be translated appear. And these all flow together back and forth depending on the context. I'm going to read this verse as it can be translated several ways. The way many Bibles have it is the Lord will provide for himself the lamb. Actually, it's the lamb, not a lamb. The lamb. But you can also translate that, the Lord will see himself as the Lamb, or the Lord will appear himself as the Lamb. Wow. All three of these flowing together. And what Abraham is saying is prophetically that God will be the Lamb. He himself will provide as himself the sacrifice. Well, we can flip forward in our story and look forward, and we should be able to hear right now John the Baptist looking up out of the River Jordan, seeing Jesus and going, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." God will provide himself as the Lamb. Now, you may think, provide and see, why would Hebrew blend these words? Well, they blend in English. If I were to ask somebody, hey, would you see to it that there are plenty of seats in this room for the class? Well, you know full well in English that means, hey, provide or make sure there are plenty of seats. Provide plenty of seats. Even in English, the idea of providing and seeing and appearing all kind of blurs together. This is actually quite common. A lot of languages do this. Hebrew is no exception. Let's go on and see, make sure that that's not the only place we see this. And lo and behold, sure enough, we see in verse 14, after God provides a ram as a substitute for Isaac, in verse 14, Abraham goes ahead and he names that place. Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide." As it is said to this day, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." The Lord will provide. Oh, another way of translating that one in verse 14, the Lord will be seen. Oh, this is truly amazing. And as it is to this day, on the mount of the Lord, he shall be seen. Wow. If you were to fast forward in time, the Mount Moriah at a future date becomes the Temple Mount. When Abraham goes up there, there's no city of Jerusalem. Between the time where Abraham, and we've got to go through the Exodus, all that period of 400 years where all of Israel gets enslaved in Egypt. During that time period, the Canaanites build a small town on top of that mountain. And that small town eventually becomes Jerusalem. And then many years later, when David makes that his capital city, he sets aside a place on the top of the mountain that will become the temple. And his son Solomon builds the temple there. Oh, on that mountain, the Temple Mountain, God will provide a lamb. He will provide himself. He will provide it himself. He will provide as himself that lamb, and he will be seen. God himself will be seen on that mount, on that Temple Mount. All this is anticipated in these 7 verses where God sees his creation. God saw and declared it good. That idea that this is the God who sees, it's also the God who will appear on that place as the Lamb. Very important for us to understand how vital it is to understand that God sees, he cares, and he appears. He's not just a far-off God who has no contact with his created universe, but he actually will come as the second person of the Trinity, God incarnate, Jesus Christ, appearing in his creation. In fact, as the embodiment of that which is good in his creation, providing himself as the Lamb, appearing also so that we can see him. He is the image, that which is seen, of the invisible God. Remember Colossians 1:15, where Jesus Christ, God incarnate, is the image, that which is seen, of the invisible God. We're going to continue this idea of God seeing and calling it good with the next video. This one's going to take probably 2 more videos to get all the way through. Bear with me, there's a lot of meat in here. I want you to read these passages for yourself and see where it takes you. Reading about God sees